So we're on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, and we're trying to derive the principle of Tam Ki Ikar B'chol Torah Kula if we need Mishras Anovim for Heter Mitzaref L'Iser, and we cannot derive Tam Ki Ikar for Basa B'chol because Basa B'chol is a Chidush Yolef Migi'ulei Ovdei Kochavim. The Torah says that after the Milchemes Midjan, we're not allowed to use the Kalim that we took as booty because they have the absorption in the walls of the Kli of the Tam of Nevelis and Trefus. The Yomrach, one of the Torah says, Kol Davar Shayom Ba'esh, Tavir Ba'esh V'Taher. So these Kalim that we use for fire, you have to do what's called Libun in order to remove the Tama Bolua. And it says, and is Hagolah for those kalim that were not used in frying or roasting, and it's all called derech tashmisho, and that's called kibola kachpolto. Is lamemer dasiri. We see clearly that the Torah is saying it's also to cook in those pots, and why is that? It must be the plata of the tam that's balua is lav taima bi'almahu v'yasa. The Torah says even though there's no mamoshes, when you cook in their pots, you don't see any nevelo or treifa there. All you get is the tam coming out because kibol kach polto, and it enters into your tavshil, and it's also. It must be because the tam ki ikar is hachanami lo shna, and therefore we're going to derive tam ki ikar in general. So in other words, we're going to derive from gulei nachrim that in Nazir tam is ki ikar. Now the problem here is that we said that Nazir has kulos, correct? It has a heter lisuro. You could be shoel on Nazirus, not in Gilei Nachrim. So now Tosfos asks the following kasha: how can we derive from Gilei Nachrim to Nazir, the din of Tam Ki Ikar? Nazir is kal migulei Nachrim. So Tosfos says that when the Torah prohibits klei midjan, included in klei midjan is also the isur for Nazir B'Yisrael to use those kalim that have a blia of yain. That's also included in the Torah's requirement of kol asher yov b'eish tavir b'eish in order to be machshir in the kalim. So therefore, the din of tam ki ikar includes also Nazir amongst all Isurei Torah. So now the Gemara comes back and says, Rabbanon, why the Rabbanon derive tam kika from Mishras is nami typically migulei ovdei kochavim, which would allow them now to agree with Rabbi Akiva that Mishras teaches me heter mitzaref l'isa. Why do Rabbanon reject heter mitzaref l'isa? Because they're going to use Mishras for tam ki ikar. Why not use Giulei Akum to derive the principle of Tam Ki Ikar? Mishras becomes free to derive Heter Mitzaref L'Isa. Amalei, so Rav Ashi responds to Rav Acha. The Rabbanan hold that you cannot derive anything from Giulei Akum. Why? Because Hasam Chidushu. There too, it's a Chidush that Pleitas Kalim of Akum is also. Because until you use the Kalim, a day will pass. And if a day passes, then the Tam Balu and the Toch B'toch dofnei akli becomes a tam pogum. The b'chol Torah kula nosin tam lefgam muter. If the tam is pogum, like for example, a sheretz falls into a pot of whatever, that's called a tam pogum. The sheretz doesn't enhance the taste, but rather detracts from the taste. And here also, after a day, the tam that's balu in the kli, when it comes out and it's polate, is going to be a tam pogum. That tam is a tam pogum, and the Torah never prohibited a tam pogum. So the very fact that in Gulei Nachrim, the Torah was machadish that you're not allowed to use these kalim without being machshir the kalim, that itself is a chiddush. What happened to Tam Pogum? That's mutter. Here it's Tam Pogum, it's also. Torah says that if you cook in those pots of the goyim without subjecting them to hechsher, to either agol or libun, then the tavshil is also. And that's a Tam Pogum, because till they used the kalim of the Oved Kocham, a day had passed, or at least the night had passed. So once again, we have the same problem that we're going to raise, that we already raised against Rabbi Akiva regarding Bas B'cholav. If Rabbi Akiva's sauce for Tam Ki'ikar is going to be Gulei Nachrim, just like we rejected Bas B'cholav because it's a Chiddush, we're going to reject the role of Gulei Nachrim as a binyanah because it's a Chiddush. Rabbi Akiva Nami HaChiddushu Amar Avuna Bar Chia Lo Asra Torah El Keder Bas Yoma. There's no chiddush in Guli Akum, because when the Torah says you have to subject the kelim of the Akum to hechsher, the Torah is specifically limited to a case of a Keder Bas Yoma, and therefore it's no saying tam delav no saying tam. It's a no saying tam l'shvach. So therefore, Guli Nachrim, according to Rabbi Akiva, could indeed serve as the source for Tam Ki'ikar and Kol Torah Kula. Hence, freeing up Mishras to derive Hetem and Starf Lisa. Frekta Gemara for Rabbanon Keder Bas Yoma Nami. Yefshel Lo Pogum Purta. The Rabbanon still insist that even if the Torah is talking about a Bas Yoma and the Kalim of Klei Midjan were used within the last 24 hours or within the last day, but nevertheless it's still a Chiddush, it's still a Tam Pogum. You can't equate an original tam with a tam that comes out of the walls of a keli, and there still is an element of chiddush here, and therefore we don't derive tam ki'ikar from Gulei Nachrim, but rather from Mishras. Now the Gemara had already established on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph that there's machlokas Rabbi Akiva Chachamim. What do we derive from Mishras in the Parsha of Nazir? The Chachamim are going to derive Tam Ki'ikar. Rabbi Akiva is going to derive Hetem and Starf L'Isa, because Rabbi Akiva is going to derive Tam Ki'ikar from Geulei Nachrim, and Mishras therefore is free for Hetem and Starf L'Isa. Now, Rabbi Avo said that in all Isurei Torah, Rabbi Yochanan holds that Ein Hetem and Starf L'Isa. Nazir is the only exception. So the Gemara asks, Omer le Rav Acha Brei Rav Avya le Rav Ashi. Rabbi Akiva in other Isurim holds that Ein Hetem and Starf L'Isa. Where do you see that? We only saw in Rabbi Akiva that Mishras teaches you Hetem and Starf L'Isa in Nazir. How did Rabbi Yochanan derive the conclusion that in Shari Suri Torah, Rabbi Akiva would maintain that Ein Hetem and Starf L'Isa? This is an introduction to the sugi that we're going to learn now, which is called Shnei Ksuvim Aboim Kecher Ein Melamdim. So again, the Gemara now, Rav Acha is raising the following question: how do we know? How does Rabbi Yochanan know that according to Rabbi Akiva, we don't derive from Nazir that Het is Mistaf Lisal Kol Yisurim Shabbat Torah? And keep in mind, we said that Nazir was relatively kal because of three reasons. And the Gemara says that Midrabanan Nishma Rabbi Akiva, from the words of the Chachamim, they derive from Mishras the Tam Ki'ikar. We should derive the conclusion that according to Rabbi Akiva, who derives Hetem Mitzarf L'Isa from Mishras, Lav Amri Rabbanon Hai Mishras Lite Tam Ki'ikar Umikana Tolomed Atadon L'Chol Yisurim Shabbat Torah. So the Rabbanon who use Mishras for the case where he soaked the grapes in mayim and then he drank the mayim, which has tam, and tam ki'ikar, and from thence we derive that tam ki'ikar b'chol Torah kula is Rabbi Akiva nami. The komoki leilai mishlas letem and starf lisa mikanda to learn l'chol yisum shv'torah. Why shouldn't Rabbi Akiva derive as a binyan ab from Nazir to Kol Tar Kula that a heter is mitzaref l'Iser. Why did Rabbi Yochanan say that Rabbi Kiva only accepts the application of heter mitzaref l'Iser in the case of Nazir? And now we're going to get to the sugi of Shnei Ksur. Amal le Rav Ashi responds to Rav Acha, Mishuv davi Nazir v'chata Shnei Ksur mabam kechad. We have in the parsha of Chatos, again, a derivation for heter mitzaref l'Iser. And once you have both Chatos and Nazir, both Isurim that are subject to the principle of heter mitzaref l'Iser, then we're going to apply the principle of Kol Shnei Ksur mabam kechad, ein melamdin. Because since the Torah has a principle called Binyan Av, and therefore could have been written and the Torah could have taught us in one occasion, and therefore the second occasion that Torah repeats the same principle is redundant. Why the redundancy? Unless it's coming to close the circle and set up a very tight, restricted misgeret to those two cases, telling you that the principle that underlies those two does not apply universally, it only applies to those two. So the second one, which is not necessary, is coming to limit this principle. And the Gemara says, where's the Shnei Ksuvim Nazir Hadar Amar, and that's Mishras. But Chatos, where do we see Heter Mitzaref L'Iser Mahi? And the Gemara answers this, Sanya, we learned in a Brisa. And now we're looking at a parasha of Karmel Chatos in Vayikra Perek Vav. It says Kol. Now, the word Kol is referring to what's called a Dvar Machol. Any foodstuff, Asher Yiga B'Bsar Yikdash, which means that food that comes in contact with a Karmel Chatos now takes on all the dinim of the Karmel Chatos, which could mean many, many different things. Number one, it could only be eaten with Zichrei Kuna, and it could only be eaten for a day, and it's subject to Pigul and Nosar and the whole 9 yards. Is Yachal Afilu Shelo Bola? So the Brisa says, wait a minute, are you telling me that simply because a piece of bread came in contact with a Karmel Chatos, therefore takes on all the dinim of a Karmel Chatos, based on the pasuk Kol Asher Yiga B'Bsar Yikdash, and we're going to take the word Yiga literally and apply this principle of Yigdash even through Negir without B'liya. Talmud Lomar Asher Yiga B'Bsara, it says in the pasuk. And what does B'Bsara mean? Ad Sheyivla B'Bsara. And what happens if there's some B'liya in the bus of the Chatos? Yigdash. The Torah says, Lios Kamo Shem Psuli, if there's Pigul and Nosar, will apply as a psul to the bread that absorbed the tam of the Chatos. The im Shera Te'achel Kechamer Shabbat. Now, the phrase Kechamer Shabbat is a bit challenging. Let's leave it on the side, and we'll say that Kechamer Shabbat right now means that the chulin that came in contact and was boleh from the Chatos takes on the chumras of the Chatos. So that means it could only be eaten by Zichrei Kahuna, and it's only eaten in the Azara, and it's only eaten for Yom V'Layla, and it would be possible in Nosar and Pigul. So the Torah is mechadish that heter is mitzaref l'Iser. All right. Now, why is it that heter mitzaref l'Iser applies over here? And we could derive it from Chatos. He says the following: why not suggest, this is the argument against the Gemara, that it's Tam Ki Ikar? Maybe that's what we're dealing with. And Enochinami, we don't need but it can't be Tam Ki Ikar because we already have, according to Rabbi Akiva, we already have Gi'ulei Nachar. So we already have derived Tam Ki Ikar. So therefore, we're talking about a case where there is no Iser of Tam Ki Ikar. For example, let's say that a half a zayis of Shuman of Chatos was nivla into a Chatzi zayis of shlomim. So you don't have a shear of a kezayis of an isur, and we cannot apply the principle of tam ki ikar, but rather we can only apply the principle of hetem mitzaref lisa, and that's going to shed a light on this very ambiguous language of kechomer sheba, because kechomer sheba sounds like it goes in two directions, right? It means that kechomer sheba, that which comes and is boleh from the chatos, gets the chumrah of the chatos, but kechomer sheba seems to imply that the chatos also picks up a chumrah from that which was in contact with the chatos. And what would that be? That would be a shlomim. Now, where's the chumrah in shlomim? Shlomim could be eaten for 2 days. Shlomim could be eaten by anyone who's tahar. And shlomim could be eaten b'chol ha'ir. So none of the chumras of chatos apply to shlomim. But get this, supposing the shlomim was nishchat a day and a half ago. It gets 2 days. And now chatos comes in contact with shlomim. Now chatos should be giving that day and the night, but now it's going to be limited by the shlomim. So here's the situation in the other direction where kechomer shebo means that dafka the chatos is going to pick up a chumrah from the shlomim. In any event, just to summarize where we're holding now, we have a principle called Shnei Ksuba Bam Kecharei Melamdin. We're going to apply that to the fact that Heter Mitzaref L'Isa is derived from both Nazir, according to Rabbi Kiva from Mishras, and from Chatos, because it says Kol Asher Yiga B'Bsor Yikdash. In fact, the Gemara v'Chachamim. Why don't they derive the din of Heter Mitzaref L'Isa from Chatos? Okay, you can't ask them why they don't derive it and apply it in the case of Nazir from Mishras, because they need Mishras for Tam Ki Ikar. But why can't they derive and apply the principle of Heter Mitzaref L'Isa, at least in the case of Chatos? And that's going to be a real problem for us, because if Heter Mitzaref L'Isa can be derived from Chatos according to the Rabbanon, then it should be a binyan av, and we don't have Shnei Ksubim Bam Ke'echad, because the Mishras is coming for Tam Ki Ikar, and the Chatos is coming for Heter Mitzaref L'Isa. So the Gemara answers that the Chacham hold that even the pasuk of Chatos is teaching me Tam Ki Ikar, but not Heter Mitzaref L'Isa. Wait a second. We just derived Tam Ki Ikar from Nazir, Utzriche. And we need two psukim to teach me Tam Ki Ikar. We need both Nazir, and which is Mishras, and Chatos Kol Shayiga. Because Rachmana Gabi Chatos, Hamamin Nazir Lo Asimine. We cannot derive any conclusions about Tam Ki Ikar from Chatos, because Nazir de Kodshim Lo Yalfina. We never derive Chulin from Kodshim. That's a hardcore rule. So when the Torah is machmir and establishes Tam Ki Ikar and Kodshim, that can't prove anything about Chulin. Now, the other way around, because of Gabi Nazir, we're going to assume that Nazir is different and has a Chumrah, even though until now we've been assuming that Nazir is Lakula for 3 different reasons. But Gabi Nazir, what does it mean, Afilu Chartzan Asule? So the Shita Mekubetza says in the name of Rabbeinu Azriel that the Chumrah of Chartzan is that it's not Derech Achila. We don't usually eat pits. Vehilkach lo asimine. If the Torah was more machmir in Nazir than in any other Isur, and Yechai for Derech, even She'ena Derech Achila, you can't derive Chatas from Nazir. Chatas doesn't have that Chumrah of being Chayav even Shalom K'derech Achila. So therefore, if we don't have a Shnei Ksubim Bam Ke'echad, because Shnei Ksubim Bam Ke'echad is based on the fact that one of those Ksubim is superfluous and unnecessary, but here we need both Nazir and Chatas. Once you have Nazir and Chatas, they join hands together, and they become a binyan av, what we call a tzad shava, and we derive from Nazir and Chatas together, l'kol tar kula, that tam is ki ikar. However, let's go back to Rabbi Akiva. He holds that Nazir and Chatas are Shnei Ksubim Bam Ke'echad Amalecha L'may Tzrichi. I don't need these two psukim. So Gemara analyzes that. Certainly, even if the Torah had said Nazir, we still need chatos. I'm sorry. Even if the Torah would have said hetem and starf liser and chatos, we would still need Nazir because we have a principle of chulin mikachim lo gamrina. Frekti Gemara, but what about the other way around? Ella lichtov Rachmana bin Nazir v'teisei chatos minei. Right, we found before earlier that. Just 1 second. So again, Rabbi Akiva holds that we're not going to apply and derive the din of hetem and staf lisel called tarkula because we have shnei ksuvim habam kechadei malamdin. And that means that once we had hetem and staf li'isa in the case of what? Of chatos, we can derive nazir from chatos. No, just 1 second. We can't derive nazir from chatos because it's kodshim, chulam kodshim l'gamrina. The other way around. We could derive nazir, we could derive chatos from nazir. Okay, now I got it. We could derive chatos from nazir. And that's based on a principle that kol isur shvatorah kagabiri binazir. Now that principle actually appears in a Gemara of Chulin Daf Tzadi Ches with regard to bittul. And in the Parsha of Nazir, we have something called Zroa B'Shela. That's the isle that the Nazir has to bring, B'Siyim Naziruso, and there we derive the halacha of bittul b'shishin. I mean, that's a whole complicated sugya there, how you arrive at shishin. But be that as it may, it's clear from that sugya that Nazir becomes the paradigm for Kol Yisurim Shabbat Torah. So with regard to the din of hetem and staf li'isur, we could have derived, let me get this right, chatos from Nazir. Again, we couldn't derive Nazir from chatos because that's kodshim, but chatos from Nazir we could derive. So it must be that from the hetem and staf li'isur of chatos, which is superfluous, now we close the entire circle of shnei ksuva bam kecharei melamdin. And therefore, as we had the tradition of Rabbi Yochanan, hetem and starf lisa does not apply in kol tarkula, it only applies in chatos and nazir. Even if we would agree to the svar of Rabbi Akiva that we could derive chatos from nazir, which is in itself questionable, we do not have shnei ksuma bam kecha. Why? Because chatos is hetem mitzarf li'isa, and we could not derive kol tarkula hetem mitzarf li'isa from chatos because kula mikachim lo gamrinon. And now we have mishras. Mishras is teaching me tam ki ikar. Now, if Mishras in Nazir teaches me tam ki ikar, b'kana tadan l'chol isur shabbat Torah. As we said before, Nazir could be the paradigm for all isur b'Torah. Torah. Like, for example, the din of bittul b'shishin. So it seems like the Gemara now is backtracking from its original understanding that according to Chachamim, ein hetem mitzarf l'isur in kol isur b'Torah. Torah, even in chatos. But now the Gemara is saying that in chatos, even the Rabbanan would agree that hetem mitzarf l'isur. We cannot derive other isurim from chatos because of the principle of chulu mikachim lo yalfina. But now the Gemara is accepting that according to Rabbanan, in chatos, hetem mitzarf l'isur. So in the note here, he quotes I'm not sure who. I think it's Shitam Kubetzes. He says the following: Ein kavanas haGemara shechazra ba behechle b'masha sor b'tchila. Right? He's being medayik that the Gemara doesn't say Ella. Whenever the Gemara changes its mind and drops the original assumption, it uses the word Ella. but rather the Gemara is bederech dechia. It's not the Gemara's chazra, but bederech dechia. So the Gemara had asked the Kasha on Rabbi Yochanan why he assumed, Rabbi Yochanan, that according to Rabbi Akiva, you don't derive from Nazir to Kol Tarkula that heter is mitzaref le'isur. And the Gemara's dechia now is that just like the Rabbanan derived from Nazir, tam ki ikol Kol Tarkula, that was Mishras, so too Rabbi Akiva should derive from Nazir that L'Kol Tarkula heter mitzaref le'isur. Why does Rabbi Yochanan insist that according to Rabbi Akiva, heter mitzaref le'isur, which applies in Nazir, cannot apply in other Isurim? But again, that's difficult because we already established according to Rabbi Akiva that Shnei Ksuvim Bam Kechnei Malamdin, because we have both Nazir and Chatos. So apparently, what we're saying now is, in this Dechia, that you cannot derive Chatos from Nazir, because Nazir has the Chumrah of Chartzon. You remember, that's not Derech Achila. So if that be the case, it's not Shnei Ksuvim Bam Kechnei Malamdin, because we need Chatos and Nazir. We need Nazir because Kodshim Chulim Kodshim Lo Yalfinon. And now we need Chatos because maybe the Chumrah of Nazir that Yochayv even Shlo Kederech Achil in Chartzon makes Nazir into a Chumrah, and therefore Heter Mitzaref Le'isur is a Chumrah in Nazir. So if we don't have Shnei Ksuvim Bam Ke'echad Ein Malam, because we need both Chatos and Nazir, now they should serve as a binyan. So how does Rabbi Yochanan know that according to Rabbi Akiva, the principle of Heter Mitzaref Le'isur only applies in these two cases? It's not a Shnei Ksuvim Bam Ke'echad Ein Malam. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva, Travayu, Leheter Mitzaref Le'isur, V'haru Shnei Ksuvim Bam Ke'echad Ein Malam. And the Gemara now changes its mind and insists that you cannot derive from Nazir for Kol Tarkul that Heter Mitzaref Le'isur because you also have Chatos. So it means at this point, the Gemara is backtracking and suggesting that you could derive Chatos from Nazir and ignore the Chumrah of Nazir of Chartzon, and instead emphasize the three kulas of Nazir, and establish that if in those three, despite those three kulas, the Torah in Nazir is saying Mishras and Heter Mitzaref Le'isur, how much more so in Chatos? And Chatos doesn't have any of those kulas, and therefore Heter Mitzaref Le'isur would apply to Chatos. Why did the Torah have to tell me in Chatos, Kol Shar Yiga, etc., that Heter Mitzaref Le'isur? And the answer is Shnei Ksuvim Bam Ke'echad Ein Malamdin. Hence, we appreciate that according to Rabbi Akiva, Heter Mitzaref Le'isur only applies in Nazir and Chatos. Amalei Rav Hashel Rav Kahana Elahad this Sanya. What about this price? Mikol Asher Yosem Migefen Hayayin Limed Al Isurei Nazir Shemitzaref from Zeh. What does that mean? Let's say he takes Yayin and Chartzon and Zag, or any combination of the two of those, and he gets to a Kizayis. Then these are different categories of Isur. And if I'm not mistaken, we're about to embark upon a sugya, just not sure if it's right here on Lameches, of what's called Lav Shebechlos. In any event, so we have these various Isurei Nazir, and how do we know that they're mitztaref zeh im zeh? So altogether, if you add the yayin and the chartzon and the zogim, you end up with a shear of kizayis, and he's going to be chayav malchus, and that's derived from the pasuk mikol asher yosef. The Rabbi Akiva, now we have a difficulty. Why do we need the pasuk of kol asher yosef? Hashti shlomer heter mitzaref le'isur. There's a kavul chomer here. If he drank yayin less than a kizayis together with pas, he'd be chayav because the pas of heter is mashlim, and how much more so yayin v'chartza v'dogim each could be mashlim. Isur li isur mi boile. I need a special pasuk kol shar yoseh To be mitzaref isa l'isa can be mitzaref isa leheter. Amalei, so Rav Kahana responds to Rav Ashi, heter le'isur v'vasachas. The case of heter and isur means that you ate the yayin and the pas together. The pas had absorbed some of the yayin, albeit a half a zayis, and now he eats that pas that has yayin in it. Then we apply the principle of heter mitzaref le'isur. But in the case where he's eating yayin, chatzon, and zogim, that's isur l'isur afil b'zecher zeh. There's no heter mitzaref le'isur here, because heter mitzaref le'isur only applies in one ma'asachila, bevasachas. But here there's no one ma'asachila. Now, when we say one ma'asachila, here's machlokas in Pesachim, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis between Rashi and Tosfos. Tosfos repeats himself here as well. According to Rashi, if he eats two things, one is a chatzi zayis of isur, let's say chelet, and the other is a chatzi zayis of heter, let's say shuman, then even though there's no taroves, he's chayiv because he ate them together, and that's heter mitzaref le'isur. Or in the case of yayin and pas. But Tosfos insists that's dafka when they're muravin. But eich shelo yeh, there is a single ma'asachila on both the hisur and the heter, and therefore we apply heter mitzaref le'isur. But the chiddush here of kol asher yosef b'gefen yayin is that even though there's not one common ma'asachila, nevertheless he's going to be chayiv. Now, all this is based on the assumption that we need a kazayas. In fact, the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon on the top of Lamed Ches, the less late siruv. Rabbi Shimon holds that you don't need a kazayas for a chiyuv malchus. You chayev for kol shehu. And Rabbi Shimon is a sugya both here in Nazir and also in Makis. Rabbi Shimon holds that the shear of kazayas and kol isurim is only for karmon. But as far as Malchus is concerned, you chayiv for achilas kolshu. And the reasoning for Rabbi Shimon, according to some Rishonim, is because he holds that an achilas kolshu is called an achila. And this is Rashi Masechet Shvuos in terms of how to define a ma'isa achila. And other Rishonim say, because even if he eats less than a kazayas, it's machsheve. And he was machshev, pachas mikazayas, kikazayas. So therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, Kol asher yasa, my dorish pay. Why do I need that pasuk to add chatzon, zog, and yayin and integrate them to a shear when there is no requirement of a shear? And this is where we're going to stop for today, Mirz Hashem, here on the top of Daf Lamed Ches. So tomorrow, Belinetta will review the question, and then we'll move on to the answer. Okay, then. Wish you a great day, and thank you.